The North Atlantic, February 1943. 300 miles west of Ireland, the destroyer cuts through black water under a moonless sky. Waves crash against her bow, sending spray across the bridge. Inside the cramped operations room, a radar screen glows pale green in the darkness. The operator leans forward, eyes fixed on a faint blip that shouldn't be there. Above, the captain stands on the bridge wing, collar turned against the wind. His hands grip the rail. He knows what that contact means. Somewhere out there, beneath the surface, a U-boat is stalking the convoy. But tonight, the hunter has become the hunted. The radar has been modified, rewired, improved beyond Admiralty specifications. If London knew, there would be hell to pay. But the captain made his choice weeks ago. Regulations written in Whitehall offices mean nothing when men are drowning in burning oil. The blip moves. The operator calls out bearing and range. The captain turns toward the helm, his voice calm and certain. Come to new heading. Increase to flank speed. The hunt begins. The Battle of the Atlantic was a war of mathematics and terror. By 1942, German U-boats were sinking Allied merchant ships faster than shipyards could replace them. Every month, hundreds of thousands of tons of cargo vanished beneath the waves. Fuel, food, ammunition, aircraft, the lifeblood of Britain's survival, rested in the hands of merchant sailors crossing 3,000 miles of hostile ocean. The convoy system offered some protection. Merchant ships traveled in groups, surrounded by Royal Navy escorts. Destroyers, corvettes, and frigates formed defensive rings, searching for threats, dropping depth charges when submarine contacts appeared. But the ocean was vast, and the U-boats were many. Admiral Karl Dönitz commanded the U-boat fleet with ruthless efficiency. He deployed wolf-pack tactics, coordinated groups of submarines attacking convoys simultaneously, overwhelming the escorts. A single convoy could face 8 or 10 U-boats converging from different directions. The escorts would rush toward one contact only to hear torpedo explosions behind them. By the time they turned back, the U-boat had slipped away into the depths. The escorts needed better eyes. Early in the war, they relied on ASDIC, sonar that could detect submerged submarines, but only at close range. Surface radar existed, but it was primitive. The Type 286 radar could detect ships, but its resolution was poor. A U-boat's conning tower, low in the water, often vanished in the clutter of wave returns. At night, U-boats surfaced to recharge batteries and move at higher speed, knowing that visual lookouts couldn't spot them in the darkness. In 1941, a breakthrough arrived. The cavity magnetron, a British invention, enabled centimetric radar. The new Type 271 radar operated on 10-centimeter wavelengths, offering far better resolution. It could detect a submarine's conning tower at several miles, even in rough seas. Escorts began receiving the new equipment, and U-boat captains found the night no longer offered sanctuary. But technology alone wasn't enough. The Type 271 was a marvel, but it had limitations. Its antenna rotated slowly, scanning the horizon in sweeps that took precious seconds. Its operators needed training, experience, and intuition to distinguish real contacts from sea clutter and rain. And its effective range, while revolutionary, still left gaps where a clever U-boat commander could slip through. The Admiralty issued strict guidelines for radar operation and maintenance. Modifications were forbidden. The equipment was new, complex, and expensive. Unauthorized changes could damage the delicate components or interfere with the carefully calibrated wavelengths. Ships were expected to operate their radar exactly as designed, exactly as specified in the technical manuals written by scientists and engineers far from the battle. But on the front lines, some captains saw things differently. Captain Frederick John Walker joined the Royal Navy before the First World War ended. He was a career officer, trained in the traditions of Nelson and Jellicoe, but he possessed something rare in the peacetime Navy, an obsession with anti-submarine warfare. Between the wars, while most officers pursued battleship commands and cruiser postings, Walker studied depth charge patterns, attack geometry, and submarine behavior. His colleagues thought him eccentric. His superiors considered him too specialized, too narrow in focus. When war came in 1939, Walker was passed over for promotion. Younger officers with better connections received destroyer commands while he remained ashore. He watched the U-boat tonnage figures rise month after month, knowing that men were dying because the Navy wasn't prepared. Finally, in 1941, he received command of HMS Stork, an elderly destroyer assigned to escort duty. Stork wasn't a glamorous posting. She was slow, worn, and equipped with outdated weapons. But Walker didn't care about prestige. He cared about killing U-boats. He drilled his crew relentlessly, practicing attack runs until every man knew his role by instinct. He developed new depth charge patterns, dropping charges in tight clusters designed to crush a submarine's pressure hull. He studied weather, currents, and submarine endurance, learning to predict where U-boats would surface and when they would dive. In December 1941, Walker's convoy encountered U-574 south of Greenland. The U-boat had torpedoed a merchant ship and was attempting to escape. Walker pursued, his destroyer racing through mountainous seas while the Aztec operator called out ranges. The U-boat dove deep, twisting and turning, but Walker anticipated every move. He dropped pattern after pattern of depth charges, each one walking closer to the target. Finally, debris and oil erupted to the surface. U-574 was destroyed. Walker had his first kill. By 1942, Walker commanded the 36th Escort Group, a flotilla of sloops hunting U-boats in the western approaches. He studied every encounter, every failed attack, every escaped submarine, and he began to notice patterns in how his radar performed. The Type 271 was excellent, but its scanning rate was too slow. By the time the antenna completed a full rotation, a U-boat could change course and slip between sweeps. The display showed contacts, but the information was always seconds old, long enough for a submarine to vanish. Walker approached his ship's radar technician, a young petty officer with an engineer's mind. Together they examined the equipment. The modification they conceived was simple but radical. By adjusting the antenna's rotation speed and altering the pulse repetition frequency, they could increase the radar's sweep rate. The display would update faster, providing near real-time tracking of contacts. The trade-off was increased wear on the motor and slightly reduced range, but Walker didn't care about longevity. He cared about contact persistence. The technician made the modifications quietly during a port stay in Liverpool. No paperwork was filed. No authorization was requested. Walker knew that regulations explicitly forbade unauthorized alterations to radar systems. The Admiralty's technical branch would be furious if they discovered what he'd done. Court-martial was a possibility. But Walker had made his calculation. The modified radar would save lives and sink U-boats. That was all that mattered. When his ship returned to sea in early 1943, the difference was immediate. Contacts that previously flickered and vanished now remained solid on the display. The faster sweep rate meant U-boats had nowhere to hide between radar pulses. Walker could track multiple targets simultaneously, vectoring his ships into attack positions with precision that had been impossible before. The Admiralty would learn about the modification soon enough. But by then, Walker intended to have results they couldn't ignore. The modification itself was elegant in its simplicity. Standard Type 271 radar rotated its antenna at approximately 4 revolutions per minute, completing a full horizon scan every 15 seconds. Walker's technician increased the rotation speed to 6 RPM, reducing scan time to 10 seconds. Simultaneously, they adjusted the pulse repetition, frequency, the rate at which the radar transmitted, bursts of radio energy, to maintain coverage without creating blind spots. The change required recalibrating the display synchronization and reinforcing the antenna, mounting to handle increased rotational stress. The motor drew more current, straining the ship's electrical system. But the result was transformative. A U-boat captain surfacing at night, accustomed to 15-second windows between radar sweeps, suddenly found himself illuminated twice in that same span. There was no time to dive, no time to alter course. The modified radar held him in an unblinking electronic grip. Walker's innovation went beyond mere speed. He instructed his operators to watch for subtle patterns in the display, the way wave clutter moved differently than solid contacts, the characteristic flutter of a submarine's wake disturbing the surface. He developed a classification system, teaching his team to distinguish fishing boats from U-boats based on radar signature alone. Other ships reported contacts and investigated cautiously. Walker's ships knew their target before they reached weapon range. The crew of Walker's ship understood they were operating outside regulations. The radar technician who performed the modification risked his career. The operators who used the enhanced system knew they were part of something unofficial, something that could end badly if the Admiralty investigated. But they trusted their captain completely. Walker was not a distant commander who issued orders from the bridge and retired to his cabin. He spent hours in the operations room, watching the radar display, discussing tactics with his operators. He knew every man's name, every man's strengths. When depth charges shook the ship and gear broke loose, he was there, hauling equipment, checking damage, ensuring his crew knew he shared every risk. That trust became crucial during hunts. Anti-submarine warfare demanded perfect coordination. The radar operator called contacts. The ASDIC operator tracked the submerged target. The depth charge crew prepared patterns. The helmsman maneuvered the ship into attack position. And Walker orchestrated it all, his voice calm over the intercom, adjusting the hunt in real time based on instinct honed by years of study. The crew knew they were hunting U-boats more effectively than any other escort group in the fleet. They saw the results: oil slicks, wreckage, German survivors pulled from the water. They understood that the modified radar was part of their success, and they kept the secret, even when other ships asked how Walker's group seemed to find U-boats in conditions where others saw nothing. Traditional escort doctrine was defensive. Destroyers and corvettes formed a protective screen around merchant convoys, reacting to threats as they appeared. If a U-boat attacked, escorts would pursue, but their primary mission was protecting the convoy, not hunting submarines. Many U-boats escaped because escorts couldn't abandon their defensive positions. Walker rejected this philosophy. He believed in offensive action, seeking out U-boats before they could attack, pursuing them relentlessly once detected, and sinking them rather than simply driving them away. His modified radar made this approach viable. Instead of waiting for U-boats to attack the convoy, he sent his ships sweeping ahead, searching for submarines positioning themselves for ambush. The enhanced sweep rate meant his ships could cover more ocean efficiently. A traditional radar required overlapping search patterns to ensure no gaps existed between scans. Walker's faster system reduced those gaps dramatically, allowing wider sweeps without risking missed contacts. His ships moved in coordinated patterns, their radar coverage interlocking, creating an electronic net that U-boats couldn't penetrate undetected. When contact occurred, Walker's tactics became ruthless. He would vector multiple ships toward the target, approaching from different angles to prevent escape. If the U-boat dove, he would hold contact with ASDIC while positioning ships in a coordinated attack pattern. Depth charges would rain down in carefully timed sequences, each pattern forcing the submarine deeper or into the path of the next attack. Walker called it creeping attack, slow, methodical pressure that gave the U-boat captain no rest, no opportunity to surface or escape. German U-boat commanders began noticing something wrong in early 1943. Submarines operating in the Western approaches reported unusually accurate British radar detection. Boats that surfaced at night to recharge batteries found themselves under attack within minutes, far faster than previous encounters. Evasive maneuvers that had worked before suddenly failed. It was as if the British escorts could see through the darkness with perfect clarity. U-boat captains were experienced, skilled officers. They understood radar technology. Germany had its own radar detection equipment, devices called METOX that warned submarines when British radar was active. But METOX warnings came constantly now, and the British attacks were somehow different, more precise, more persistent. Some U-boat commanders theorized that the British had developed new radar with faster scanning capabilities. Others believed spies or captured equipment had revealed German evasion tactics. A few wondered if the Allies had broken German naval codes and were anticipating submarine positions. The truth, that one British captain had simply made his radar work faster, was almost too simple to consider. The psychological effect was significant. U-boat crews were already operating under tremendous stress. The Atlantic was a killing ground where depth charges crushed hulls and drowning came slowly in the cold darkness. Now that danger intensified. Surfacing at night, previously a relative refuge, became a desperate gamble. Commanders had to choose between staying submerged with depleting batteries or risking surface detection. Either way, Walker's ships seemed to find them. The Admiralty's technical branch existed for good reasons. Radar was cutting-edge technology, complex and temperamental. Unauthorized modifications could cause equipment failure, wasted resources, and compromised fleet effectiveness. Standards and regulations ensured that all ships operated compatible systems, that spare parts fit properly, and that technical specifications remained consistent across the fleet. When reports of Walker's modification reached Whitehall, passed along by dock workers who noticed unusual adjustments during maintenance, senior officers were appalled. Walker had violated direct orders. He had altered expensive classified equipment without authorization. He had potentially compromised operational security by discussing technical specifications with enlisted technicians. It was precisely the kind of maverick behavior that regulations were designed to prevent. Orders were drafted calling Walker to London for disciplinary proceedings. But those orders faced an inconvenient obstacle. Walker's ships kept sinking U-boats. While staff officers composed reprimands, Walker's escort group was at sea, destroying submarines at a rate that exceeded the rest of the fleet combined. The Western Approaches Command recognized that whatever Walker was doing, it was working spectacularly. The Admiralty found itself in an impossible position. Punishing Walker would damage morale and send a message that innovation was unwelcome. But ignoring his violation of regulations would undermine the entire technical standards system. The compromise was bureaucratic silence. No official approval, but no official sanction either. Walker remained at sea, his modification tacitly accepted but never formally authorized. Walker understood the stakes of his decision. Military regulations existed to maintain order, discipline, and consistency. Officers who ignored rules because they believed they knew better were dangerous. Chains of command collapsed when individuals substituted personal judgment for official orders. Walker wasn't naive about these principles. He had spent decades in a service built on discipline and obedience, but he had also watched merchant sailors die. He had seen the tonnage figures that proved Britain was losing the Atlantic battle. He knew that every week of delay, every sunken convoy, brought Britain closer to starvation and defeat. The war wouldn't wait for committees to evaluate technical proposals and authorize modifications through proper channels. So Walker made a choice that carried personal and professional risk. If his modification failed, if ships were lost because equipment malfunctioned, the responsibility would be his alone. If the Admiralty pressed charges, his career would end in disgrace. But if the modification worked, if U-boats died and convoys survived, then the risk was justified. This moral calculation defined a certain kind of wartime leadership, not the leadership of grand strategy or inspiring speeches, but the leadership of technical competence and practical courage. Walker bet his career on his judgment, his experience, and his understanding of the tactical problem. He didn't ask permission because permission would have been denied. He acted, accepted the consequences, and let results speak for themselves. March 17, 1943. Walker's ship, now HMS Starling, commanded the 2nd Support Group hunting U-boats southwest of Iceland. Intelligence indicated several U-boats were operating in the area, targeting convoys bound for Britain. The weather was brutal: gale-force winds, heavy seas, visibility near zero. Conditions that would normally favor submarines running on the surface, hidden by storm and darkness. But Walker's modified radar cut through the weather. At 2147 hours, the operator reported contact bearing 215 degrees, range 8,000 yards. The blip was solid, persistent, unmistakable. Walker studied the display for 30 seconds, confirming the contact's movement. The target was heading northeast at approximately 12 knots. fast enough to be a surfaced U-boat, too slow to be a merchant ship. Walker ordered full speed, vectoring Starling toward the contact while signaling his accompanying ships to take flanking positions. The U-boat, later identified as U-432, had no warning. Its commander was focused on positioning for an attack on a convoy whose location had been transmitted from U-boat headquarters. He had no reason to suspect a British escort was closing from behind, guided by radar that updated faster than he could react. At 4,000 yards, U-432's METOX detector finally screamed a warning. The commander shouted orders to dive. Lookouts tumbled down the conning tower hatch. Ballast tanks flooded. But 40 seconds wasn't enough. Starling's searchlight snapped on, illuminating the submarine's hull already half submerged. Walker's forward gun crew opened fire, shells splashing around the vanishing conning tower. U-432 crashed dove, plunging into the depths at maximum angle. Walker followed, his ASDIC operator tracking the submarine as it descended past 100 feet, 200, 300. The U-boat commander was skilled, twisting his boat through evasive turns, changing depth rapidly to confuse the sonar. But Walker had practiced this hunt hundreds of times. He positioned Starling directly above the submarine's projected track and ordered a 10-charge pattern. The depth charges splashed overboard in precise sequence, sinking through the black water, their hydrostatic fuses set for 350 feet. 10 seconds passed. 20. Then the ocean erupted. The explosions lifted Starling's stern clear of the water. Men grabbed handholds as the ship shuddered. Below, U-432's pressure hull buckled under the combined shockwave. Rivets sheared, seams split. Water blasted through the ruptures with the force of fire hoses, overwhelming pumps and watertight doors. The submarine's bow tilted downward, angling toward the ocean floor 3,000 feet below. Inside the dying U-boat, 45 men realized they were already dead. Some scrambled toward escape hatches that couldn't open against the external water pressure. Others simply held on as the hull collapsed completely, bulkheads imploding, killing everyone instantly. U-432 vanished from Starling's ASDIC display at 22:11 hours, exactly 24 minutes after first radar contact. Oil and debris surfaced. Walker ordered searchlights to sweep the wreckage. Life jackets, wooden planks, and personal items bobbed in the swell. No survivors. He stood on the bridge wing, watching the evidence of his kill drift past, and felt no triumph. Just grim satisfaction that one more submarine would never reach a convoy. But the night wasn't finished. At 34 hours, the radar operator called out another contact. Bearing 042 degrees, range 11,000 yards. Walker checked the plot. This U-boat was positioned ahead of the convoy route, exactly where a patient commander would wait for targets to arrive. U-592, though Walker didn't know the designation yet. This time Walker modified his approach. Instead of a direct pursuit, he maneuvered Starling to close from the U-boat's stern quarter, keeping his radar signature minimal by approaching at an angle. The modified radar's faster sweep meant he could track the target continuously even while maneuvering. Traditional radar would have lost contact during course changes, but Walker's display held the blip steady. At 6,000 yards, U-592's watch officer spotted Starling's silhouette against the horizon. The alarm sounded instantly. The U-boat dove immediately, faster than U-432 had managed, its commander already suspecting that British radar was more effective than intelligence suggested. But suspicion didn't equal survival. Walker tracked the dive, watching his ASDIC operator's hands sketch the submarine's depth and course on a plotting table. He calculated intercept angles mentally, decades of practice reducing complex geometry to instinct. He ordered a creeping attack. Starling would slow to 5 knots and pass directly over the submarine while dropping charges in a precise pattern, designed to bracket the target regardless of evasive action. The approach took 18 minutes. U-592's commander heard Starling's propellers above him, thudding slowly through the water. He knew what was coming. He ordered maximum depth and emergency speed, pushing his submarine past safe operating limits. The depth gauge passed 400 feet. 500. The hull groaned under pressure it wasn't designed to withstand. Starling's depth charges walked down in sequence. The first pattern exploded short. The second pattern straddled the submarine perfectly. The shock waves hammered U-592 from both sides simultaneously, cracking the pressure hull like an eggshell. This time there was no slow flooding. The hull imploded catastrophically, crushing everyone aboard before they could even register the sensation. The submarine became a tomb plummeting toward the ocean floor. Walker's ASDIC operator reported breaking up noises, the distinctive crackling of a hull collapsing under pressure. 2 U-boats in one night. But Walker wasn't celebrating. He was studying the plot, considering where other submarines might be positioned, calculating how to use his modified radar to maximum effect. Over the following 6 weeks, Walker's second support group hunted U-boats with systematic intensity. April brought 3 more kills: U-635 south of Greenland, U-191 west of Ireland, and U-386 in the North Channel. May added 2 more, U-202 and U-258. Both caught surfaced at night by radar contacts that gave them no time to escape. Each hunt followed similar patterns. The modified radar detected U-boats that traditional equipment would have missed. Walker's ships closed swiftly, guided by real-time tracking that eliminated guesswork. The submarines dove, and Walker's depth charges found them with accuracy born from relentless practice. By June 1943, Walker's personal tally reached 9 confirmed U-boat kills, more than most escort commanders achieved in the entire war. The Admiralty could no longer pretend Walker's methods were unofficial accidents. His success rate demanded explanation. When staff officers finally inspected Starling during a port visit, they discovered the radar modifications immediately. The expected outrage followed: reports, inquiries, demands for explanations. But Walker's response was simple. He provided detailed technical documentation of the modifications, performance data showing improved detection rates, and the list of 9 destroyed U-boats. He offered to restore the radar to standard configuration if ordered, and he waited while the Admiralty decided whether to court-martial or promote him. The decision, when it came, was pragmatic. Walker would not face charges. His modifications would be studied by technical experts, and quietly, other escort groups would receive similar radar adjustments, implemented through official channels but based entirely on Walker's unauthorized innovation. He had forced the Admiralty to choose between bureaucratic correctness and operational effectiveness. The dying men in 9 U-boats testified which choice mattered more. The impact of Walker's innovations rippled far beyond his personal kill count. By summer 1943, the Battle of the Atlantic had reached a turning point. U-boat losses spiked dramatically while their success rate against convoys plummeted. Admiral Donitz, studying casualty reports, realized his submarine force was facing a fundamental shift in tactical balance. In May 1943 alone, Germany lost 41 U-boats, a catastrophic toll that exceeded the rate at which new submarines could be commissioned. Donitz withdrew his wolf packs from the North Atlantic temporarily, seeking explanations for the sudden reversal. Intelligence officers investigated whether codes had been broken, whether new weapons had been deployed, whether Allied tactics had changed fundamentally. The truth was more complex. Multiple factors contributed to the Allied victory: longer-range patrol aircraft, improved depth charges, better convoy coordination, and yes, broken German codes. But among the tactical improvements, radar effectiveness stood out. U-boat commanders consistently reported that British escorts seemed to detect them faster, track them more accurately, and attack with precision that hadn't existed months earlier. Walker's modification wasn't the only radar improvement implemented during this period. The Admiralty's technical branches had been working on multiple enhancements, but Walker's practical battlefield innovation demonstrated that frontline officers understood tactical requirements better than rear area engineers. His willingness to violate regulations to achieve results forced a cultural shift within the Royal Navy's technical establishment. Other escort commanders began experimenting with their own tactical innovations. Some modified depth charge patterns, others adjusted ASDIC search procedures, A few developed new communication protocols for coordinating multi-ship attacks. The Admiralty, having tacitly accepted Walker's unauthorized modifications, found itself unable to suppress this wave of practical innovation without appearing hypocritical. By August 1943, standardized radar improvements based partly on Walker's modifications were being installed across the escort fleet. The official documentation credited Admiralty technical experts with the enhancements, making no mention of a maverick captain who had implemented them months earlier without permission. Walker didn't care about credit. He cared that more escorts now had the tools to kill U-boats effectively. The statistical evidence was undeniable. Convoy losses dropped from catastrophic to manageable. In the second half of 1943, Allied shipping tonnage destroyed by U-boats fell by more than 60% compared to the previous year. Simultaneously, U-boat losses rose to unsustainable levels. By the end of 1943, Germany had lost more than 200 submarines, gutting the experienced officer corps and forcing crews to sea with inadequate training. Walker himself continued hunting. His second support group ranged across the Atlantic, seeking wolf packs before they could threaten convoys. His ships worked in coordinated patterns, their modified radar creating overlapping coverage zones that U-boats couldn't penetrate. Between 1943 and 1944, Walker's group accounted for more U-boat kills than any comparable formation in the Royal Navy, but success carried costs beyond enemy casualties. Walker drove himself relentlessly. He spent days on the bridge without sleep, analyzing every contact, supervising every hunt. His officers worried about his health, but Walker refused rest while U-boats still operated. He had watched too many merchant sailors die to accept anything less than total commitment. In July 1944, Walker was promoted to captain and awarded the Distinguished Service Order with 3 bars, an almost unprecedented recognition. The official citations mentioned his exceptional leadership and tactical brilliance, but made no reference to unauthorized modifications or violations of Admiralty regulations. The bureaucratic compromise was complete. Walker received recognition for results, while the institutional fiction of proper procedures remained intact. But Walker's body was failing. Months of stress, inadequate rest, and relentless operational tempo had destroyed his health. In July 1944, while preparing for another patrol, he collapsed from a cerebral thrombosis, a stroke brought on by exhaustion and stress. He was hospitalized immediately, but his condition deteriorated rapidly. Frederick John Walker died on July 9, 1944, at age 48. His funeral in Liverpool drew thousands of mourners, sailors, officers, merchant seamen whose lives his innovations had saved. The Royal Navy provided full honors, including a gun salute and a procession through the city. It was a recognition that had eluded him during the peacetime years when his obsession with anti-submarine warfare seemed eccentric and narrow. Walker's final tally included 25 U-boats destroyed or shared kills, a record unmatched by any other Allied escort commander. 9 of those kills came directly from hunts enabled by his modified radar, the unauthorized innovation that the Admiralty initially wanted to punish and ultimately adopted fleet-wide. The broader legacy extended beyond statistics. Walker had demonstrated that rigid adherence to regulations could be strategically counterproductive. His willingness to risk his career for tactical effectiveness forced the Royal Navy to recognize that frontline experience mattered more than bureaucratic procedure. After Walker, the Admiralty became more receptive to field modifications and tactical innovations, understanding that the officers facing the enemy often understood the fight better than staff officers in London. The German U-boat force never recovered from the losses of 1943. By 1944, submarine operations had shifted from offensive campaigns to desperate defensive actions. U-boats that once hunted convoys with confidence now skulked in distant waters, avoiding the Allied escorts whose radar and tactics had made the Atlantic a killing ground. The wolf packs that nearly starved Britain into submission were broken, scattered, and rendered strategically irrelevant. Walker's modifications played a measurable role in that victory. 9 U-boats sunk directly, but hundreds of convoys protected by the tactics and technology his innovation inspired. Thousands of merchant sailors reached port safely because a captain in a worn destroyer decided that saving lives mattered. More than following rules, the Admiralty never officially acknowledged that Walker had been right to violate regulations, but they quietly distributed technical manuals describing radar modifications nearly identical to his unauthorized changes. They promoted officers who demonstrated tactical innovation, and they established procedures allowing field commanders to recommend equipment improvements without waiting for bureaucratic approval. It was Walker's victory, even if his name appeared nowhere in the official documentation. There is a particular kind of courage that has nothing to do with battlefield heroics. It's the courage to trust your judgment against institutional authority, to risk your career on a technical gamble, to prioritize results over regulations when lives hang in the balance. Frederick Walker possessed that courage in rare measure. His story reveals a fundamental tension in military organizations. Regulations exist to maintain order, ensure consistency, and prevent chaos. But warfare is inherently chaotic, unpredictable, and resistant to standardization. The tools that work in peacetime, proper channels, careful approvals, methodical procedures, can become deadly obstacles when the enemy is sinking ships faster than bureaucrats can process paperwork. Walker understood this intuitively. He knew that 9 U-boats destroyed mattered more than perfect adherence to technical specifications. He calculated that merchant sailors drowning in the North Atlantic wouldn't care whether his radar modifications had been properly authorized, and he accepted that his career might end in disgrace if his gamble failed, because the alternative, following rules while men died, was morally unacceptable. The 9 U-boats he killed with his modified radar represent more than tactical victories. They represent a philosophy of leadership that prioritizes mission success over personal safety, that trusts practical experience over theoretical guidelines, and that accepts responsibility for decisions regardless of consequences. Walker bet everything on his judgment, and history proved him right. But history also extracted its price. Walker died exhausted, worn out by the relentless demands he placed on himself. He never enjoyed peacetime success or retirement honors. His name remains less famous than admirals who commanded fleets or generals who led armies. Yet his impact on the Battle of the Atlantic, on anti-submarine warfare, and on naval tactical innovation remains profound. The modified radar that infuriated the Admiralty became standard equipment. The hunting tactics they initially considered too aggressive became doctrine. The willingness to innovate under pressure became a recognized virtue rather than a violation. Walker forced the Royal Navy to evolve, and that evolution helped win the war. In the end, 9 U-boats rest on the Atlantic floor because one captain decided that rules existed to serve victory, not the other way around. That lesson, that bureaucratic correctness must sometimes yield to battlefield necessity, remains as relevant today as it was in the dark waters of 1943. Walker's legacy isn't just the submarines he sank. It's the principle that leadership sometimes requires defiance, that innovation sometimes demands risk, and that saving lives sometimes means breaking rules. The Admiralty was furious, but the sailors lived, and that was all that mattered.